The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, breaking the pre-dawn silence that had settled over forward operating base Rhino like a death shroud. Echo 6 Actual, we have multiple KIA at checkpoint Bravo. Repeat, multiple KIA. Request immediate QRF support. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Martinez, and even through the static, everyone in the Tactical Operations Center could hear the barely controlled panic threading through his words. Colonel James Reeves set down his coffee with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the 3 hours of sleep he'd managed in the past 48 hours. Around him, the TOC erupted into controlled chaos as analysts pulled up thermal imagery and communications specialists established contact with the embattled checkpoint 15 kilometers northeast of their position. On the main display screen, 16 red dots marked the positions where American soldiers had breathed their last breath just moments before. But there was something else on that screen, something that made Reeves lean forward and squint at the grainy satellite feed. A single green dot moved with impossible precision through the rocky terrain surrounding the checkpoint, methodically eliminating hostile targets that had been invisible to conventional surveillance just minutes earlier. The timestamp showed the engagement had lasted exactly 17 minutes, 16 confirmed kills, 0 friendly casualties beyond the initial ambush. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Thompson from the intelligence station, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that he was trying desperately to suppress. "We're receiving confirmation from Overwatch. Single shooter eliminated all 16 targets. Precision shots, all headshots, maximum range approximately 800 meters in near-zero visibility conditions." Reeves felt his stomach clench. He knew of only 3 snipers currently deployed in their area of operations capable of that kind of shooting, and 2 of them were currently assigned to different sectors entirely, which meant the shooter was someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who had disobeyed direct orders and inserted herself into an active combat zone without authorization. "Get me Phantom," he said quietly, using the call sign that had become both legend and liability within the special operations community. "And get me every piece of intel we have on what happened at that checkpoint. I want to know how 16 insurgents managed to position themselves for an ambush without triggering a single early warning system." The silence that followed his words felt heavier than the morning air outside, thick with the weight of questions that nobody wanted to ask and answers that nobody wanted to hear. Outside, the Afghan sky was beginning to light, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But beauty was a luxury that forward operating base Rhino couldn't afford, not when one of their own had just saved American lives while simultaneously creating a political nightmare that could end careers and destroy reputations. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vasquez had always been invisible until the moment she pulled the trigger. For the past 18 months, she had operated in the shadows of the special operations community, her kill count climbing steadily while her official recognition remained non-existent. The men she served alongside called her Phantom not because she was hard to see, but because her existence was something they pretended not to acknowledge. She was a woman in a world that didn't want women, a sniper in a brotherhood that barely tolerated her presence, and a soldier whose skills had repeatedly saved lives while her gender made her a constant source of controversy. The Navy SEALs she supported would never admit it publicly, but privately they knew the truth. Phantom was the best long-range shooter any of them had ever seen. At 28 years old, Elena had already accumulated more confirmed kills than snipers with twice her experience, but her personnel file remained suspiciously thin. No commendations, no official recognition, no acknowledgement of her contributions to successful missions across 3 different theaters of operation. She existed in the space between official policy and battlefield necessity, tolerated because she was useful but never truly accepted because she challenged everything the military thought it knew about women in combat. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had become a ghost in order to prove that women belonged on the front lines. Every shot she took was both a demonstration of her capabilities and a reminder of how far outside the lines she had to operate to use them. The men who relied on her protection during missions would return to base and speak in carefully neutral terms about sniper support and Overwatch assistance, never mentioning her name or gender in their after-action reports. This morning's engagement at Checkpoint Bravo was different, though. 16 targets eliminated in 17 minutes wasn't something that could be buried in vague language or attributed to unknown friendly forces. The satellite footage was too clear, the radio intercepts too detailed, and the tactical precision too distinctive to hide behind bureaucratic euphemisms. Alina knew that her decision to intervene at the checkpoint would have consequences. She had been specifically ordered to remain at the forward observation post and provide intelligence only, not to engage unless directly threatened. But when she had watched through her scope as insurgents prepared to overrun a position held by 8 American soldiers, the choice between following orders and saving lives hadn't really been a choice at all. Now, as she made her way back toward the forward operating base through terrain that offered concealment but no comfort, she understood that everything was about to change. The silence that had protected her was about to be broken, and she wasn't sure whether that would prove to be salvation or destruction. The call came through Alina's earpiece as she was still 2 kilometers out from base, Colonel Reeves' voice carrying the weight of authority and barely suppressed frustration. "Phantom, this is Echo 6 Actual. Return to base immediately for debrief. Acknowledge." She keyed her radio once, the standard acknowledgement that meant message received and understood. Speaking would require her to reveal more than she was ready to share, and besides, everything that needed to be said would be said soon enough. The evidence was already uploaded to the tactical network, 16 thermal signatures that had gone cold under her crosshairs, 16 lives ended with the kind of surgical precision that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. As she moved through the early morning light, Alina's mind wandered to the letter she had written to her sister 3 weeks earlier, the one that was currently sealed in an envelope in her footlocker back at base. It was the kind of letter that soldiers wrote when they suspected they might not make it home, full of explanations for choices that civilians would never understand and apologies for risks that she couldn't bring herself to regret. "Maria," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I finally stepped too far outside the lines to find my way back." She had written 12 drafts of that letter, trying to find words that could bridge the gap between the sister who had left Lowe's Angels to serve her country and the weapon she had become in the mountains of Afghanistan. The terrain ahead began to flatten out, which meant she was approaching the outer perimeter of the base. Soon, there would be questions, investigations, and consequences that she had been avoiding for 18 months. But there would also be families who would receive phone calls telling them their sons and husbands were coming home instead of flag-draped coffins, and that made whatever came next worth accepting. Alina's weapon felt heavier with each step, not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. Every modification she had made to the rifle, every adjustment to the scope, every round she had hand-loaded for maximum accuracy, all of it had been preparation for moments like this morning, when the difference between life and death could be measured in millimeters and milliseconds. She thought about the insurgent who had been setting up the rocket-propelled grenade that would have taken out the entire checkpoint command post. Through her scope, she had seen his face clearly enough to notice the scar running across his left cheek and the way he favored his right leg when he moved. He had been someone's son, possibly someone's father, but he had also been seconds away from killing 8 American soldiers who had never even seen him coming. The first guard tower came into view, and Alina could see the sentries tracking her movement through their own scopes. They knew who she was, of course. Everyone on base knew about the woman sniper who operated with the special operations teams, even if they weren't supposed to talk about it. She had become something between a rumor and a legend, visible enough to be useful, but invisible enough to be deniable. As she approached the main gate, Alina realized that her days of being invisible were probably over. Whatever happened in the debrief, whatever decisions were made about her future, the silence that had protected her was about to be broken. 16 kills in 17 minutes wasn't something that could be hidden in classified reports or buried in operational security protocols. The guard at the main checkpoint nodded as she passed, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes filled with something that might have been respect. "Morning, Phantom," he said quietly, using her call sign like a title that carried weight beyond its syllables. "Colonel wants to see you in the TOC." Alina nodded and continued walking, her boots finding familiar paths between the prefabricated buildings and razor wire barriers that had become more familiar to her than the streets of her hometown. In less than an hour, she would be sitting across from officers who would decide whether she was a hero or a liability, whether her actions that morning were worthy of commendation or court-martial. The Tactical Operations Center hummed with the controlled energy of a military unit processing a significant event. Alina could feel the eyes of every person in the room tracking her movement as she approached Colonel Reeves' position near the main display screen. The satellite footage of that morning's engagement was still playing on a loop, showing the thermal signatures of 16 insurgents winking out of existence with methodical precision. "Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez," Colonel Reeves said formally, his use of her rank and full name instead of her call sign sending a clear message about the official nature of what was about to happen. "Take a seat. We need to talk." Alina remained standing, her rifle slung across her back and her gear still carrying the dust and cordite residue of the morning's work. "Sir, request permission to secure my weapon and equipment before beginning debrief." "Negative," Reeves replied, his tone suggesting that this conversation was going to happen now, regardless of protocols or personal comfort. "I need to understand what happened out there, and I need to understand it immediately." Around them, the normal activity of the TOC continued, but Alina could sense the way conversations had quieted and how personnel were finding excuses to remain within earshot. Everyone knew that what happened in the next few minutes would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every woman who might follow in her footsteps. At 3:30 hours, I observed insurgent forces establishing positions around Checkpoint Bravo. Alina began, her voice carrying the flat, professional tone that special operations personnel used when reporting on events that would have been unthinkable to civilians. 8 individuals with automatic weapons, 4 with rocket-propelled grenades, 3 with improvised explosive devices, and 1 individual who appeared to be directing the operation. She paused, watching Reeves' face for any sign of how he was processing this information. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the way he held his shoulders and the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was already calculating the political implications of what she was telling him. "I attempted to establish radio contact with Checkpoint Bravo to provide early warning," Alina continued, "but received no response. Analysis of the tactical situation indicated that insurgent forces would be in position to launch their attack within minutes, with high probability of total casualties among friendly forces." The silence that followed her words felt heavy with the weight of decisions made and consequences accepted. Everyone in the TOC understood the mathematics of what she was describing. 8 American soldiers who would be dead if she had followed orders and remained in a passive observation role. Colonel Reeves studied the thermal footage on the main screen, watching the methodical elimination of targets that had taken place in near-perfect darkness across terrain that would have challenged even experienced snipers in daylight conditions. "Gunnery Sergeant, you were specifically ordered to maintain observation position and report intelligence only. At what point did you make the decision to engage?" Alina's answer came without hesitation, delivered with the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt or second-guessing. When I realized that following orders would result in the deaths of 8 American soldiers, sir. The words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing everyone present to confront the gap between military protocol and battlefield reality. Alina had chosen to save lives instead of following orders, and everyone in the room understood that both choices carried consequences that extended far beyond this single incident. Lieutenant Thompson cleared his throat from his position at the intelligence station, drawing attention to the data streaming across his monitor. Sir, we're receiving confirmation from multiple sources. All 16 targets eliminated, no civilian casualties, friendly forces secure and extracted without incident. Reeves nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that he was processing information that confirmed what he already knew but wished he didn't have to acknowledge. Gunnery Sergeant, I need you to understand the position this puts us in. Your actions this morning saved American lives, but they also violated direct orders and exposed us to significant operational security risks. Alina remained standing at attention, her eyes focused on a point just over the colonel's left shoulder in the manner of military personnel receiving formal reprimands. She had known this moment would come eventually. Every mission she had completed, every life she had saved, and every kill she had accumulated had been building toward a reckoning that could no longer be postponed. Sir, I accept full responsibility for my actions and understand the consequences, she replied, her voice carrying the steady tone of someone who had already made peace with whatever punishment might follow. My priority was the preservation of American lives, and I would make the same decision again under identical circumstances. The honesty of her response seemed to catch Reeves off guard, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped enough to reveal something that might have been admiration. In a career spanning 22 years, he had encountered few soldiers willing to sacrifice their own futures for principles that couldn't be found in any regulation or manual. Around them, the TOC had grown quieter as personnel found reasons to focus more intently on their assigned tasks while still listening to every word of the conversation. Everyone understood they were witnessing something significant, a moment when unofficial policies and unspoken arrangements would either be legitimized or abandoned entirely. The problem, Gunnery Sergeant, Reeves continued, is that acknowledging your actions means acknowledging your presence in areas where women are officially prohibited from operating. It means explaining how a female Marine sniper accumulated a kill count that exceeds most of our male special operations personnel. It means having conversations with people in Washington who would prefer to pretend that situations like this morning never happen. Alina understood the subtext of what he was saying. Her effectiveness as a sniper had always been measured against her liability as a symbol, and this morning's engagement had tipped the balance in a direction that could no longer be ignored or managed through bureaucratic silence. The radio crackled again, this time with a communication from higher headquarters that would determine whether the next phase of Alina's military career would unfold in a courtroom or a commendation ceremony. The voice belonged to General Morrison, whose reputation for straight talk and disregard for political considerations had made him both respected and feared throughout the special operations community. Echo 6 Actual, this is Warrior 6. I need a complete briefing on this morning's engagement within the hour, and I need it from the shooter herself, not through intermediaries or sanitized reports. Colonel Reeves keyed his radio with the expression of a man who had just watched his careful management of a delicate situation become someone else's responsibility. Warrior 6, understand you want to speak directly with Phantom. She's available for immediate briefing. Negative on the call sign, Colonel. I want to speak with Gunnery Sergeant Alina Vasquez, United States Marine Corps, and I want her to tell me exactly what happened out there without any of the creative editing that's been protecting her for the past 18 months. The use of her full name and rank over an open radio channel felt like a door slamming shut on the chapter of her career that had been defined by anonymity and deniability. Alina realized that General Morrison's words had just made her existence official in a way that couldn't be taken back or explained away. In the silence that followed, she could almost feel the weight of expectations shifting around her. For 18 months, she had been valuable precisely because she could be denied, because her contributions could be attributed to other sources, and her presence could be minimized in official reports. Now, she was about to become visible in a way that would change everything, not just for her, but for every woman who might follow her path. Alina moved to the radio console with the steady gait of someone walking toward either vindication or crucifixion, understanding that the distinction might not matter as much as she had once believed. General Morrison's reputation suggested that he was less interested in political implications than in battlefield results, but even straight-talking generals had to answer to politicians who measured success in terms of votes rather than lives saved. "Warrior 6, this is Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying across encrypted channels to a general she had never met but whose decisions would determine whether her military career ended in disgrace or recognition. "Ready for your questions, sir." "Gunnery Sergeant, I'm looking at footage that shows 16 enemy combatants eliminated in 17 minutes by a single shooter operating at maximum effective range in near-zero visibility conditions. I'm also looking at after-action reports from the past 18 months that somehow managed to avoid mentioning your name, despite the fact that you've been providing sniper support for some of our most sensitive operations." Morrison's words carried the weight of someone who had already done his homework and wasn't interested in receiving carefully prepared answers to questions he hadn't asked. Alina realized that this conversation was going to be different from the careful dance of acknowledgement and denial that had characterized her previous interactions with senior leadership. "Sir, I've been operating under operational security protocols that designated my involvement as classified beyond normal reporting requirements," Alina replied, choosing her words carefully but refusing to hide behind euphemisms that everyone knew were barely concealing the truth. "What I want to know, Gunnery Sergeant, is whether you're as good as the numbers suggest, or whether you've been getting credit for other people's work, because it's convenient to have a female sniper on the roster for political reasons." The bluntness of Morrison's question cut through 18 months of careful ambiguity like a blade, forcing Alina to defend not just her actions, but her competence in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. She understood that this was the moment when her career would be defined by her response, when years of proving herself in silence would be reduced to words spoken over a radio channel that dozens of people were monitoring. "Sir, every shot recorded in my file was taken by me, under conditions that I assessed and engaged according to my training and experience. This morning's engagement was consistent with my previous performance and capabilities." The silence that followed felt like a judgment being rendered, and Alina found herself holding her breath while waiting for Morrison's response. Around her, the TOC had become completely quiet except for the humming of electronic equipment and the distant sound of helicopters conducting routine patrols. "Gunnery Sergeant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you the best sniper currently deployed in this theater of operations?" Alina felt the weight of 18 months of self-doubt and external skepticism pressing down on her as she considered how to respond. False modesty would be dishonest, but confidence could be mistaken for arrogance. The truth was simpler and more complicated than either option. "Sir, I'm the most effective sniper currently deployed in this theater, based on confirmed kills, mission success rates, and 0 friendly fire incidents across all operations." "Outstanding," Morrison replied, his tone suggesting that her answer had confirmed something he had already suspected. "Because I'm looking at casualty reports from operations you've supported, and I'm seeing success rates that are significantly higher than baseline averages for similar missions." Alina realized that General Morrison had been conducting his own investigation into her effectiveness, probably prompted by the kind of statistical anomalies that made intelligence analysts ask uncomfortable questions about why certain units consistently outperformed expectations. The conversation was interrupted by another voice on the radio, this one belonging to someone whose authority even General Morrison couldn't ignore. All stations, this is Pentagon 6. General Morrison, Colonel Reeves, and Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez are directed to report for secure video conference immediately. Authentication code follows. Alina felt her stomach clench as she recognized the implications of being summoned to a video conference that included personnel at the Pentagon level. Whatever decisions were about to be made regarding her future, they were being made by people whose primary concerns were political rather than tactical. Colonel Reeves gestured toward the secure communications booth at the far end of the TOC, his expression suggesting that he was no more enthusiastic about the upcoming conversation than she was. Gunnery Sergeant, looks like we're about to find out whether saving American lives is still considered a good thing at higher levels of command. As they walked toward the booth, Alina couldn't help but notice the way conversation stopped, and personnel found reasons to look busy whenever she passed. She had become the center of attention in a way that felt both validating and terrifying, knowing that her next few words might determine not just her own fate, but the future of women in combat roles throughout the military. The secure video conference connected them to a room in the Pentagon, where 3 generals and 2 civilians sat around a polished table that probably cost more than Alina's annual salary. The formal setting and serious expressions of the participants suggested that this conversation was going to be about much more than a single engagement at a remote checkpoint in Afghanistan. General Morrison, Colonel Reeves, Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez, began the senior general, whose stars and ribbons identified him as someone whose decisions affected entire theaters of operation. We're here to discuss this morning's engagement and its implications for current policies regarding women in combat roles. Alina realized that she had become a test case, a symbol whose actions would be used to justify or condemn policies that affected thousands of women serving in the military. The irony wasn't lost on her that 18 months of trying to remain invisible had culminated in becoming the most visible female service member in the country. Gunnery Sergeant, continued the general, your personnel file makes for interesting reading. Top of your class in sniper school, expert marksman ratings across multiple weapon systems, and operational performance that exceeds standards for personnel with twice your experience. But officially, you don't exist in any capacity that would allow you to accumulate the kind of combat record that we're seeing. The statement hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Alina to defend not just her actions, but her very existence as a combat-effective female Marine. She understood that the conversation was really about whether the military was ready to acknowledge what she represented, or whether it would be easier to make her disappear again. Sir, I've served according to my abilities and training, supporting missions that required my specific skill, set regardless of policy limitations that may not have anticipated current operational requirements. One of the civilians leaned forward, his expression suggesting that he was more interested in political implications than military effectiveness. Gunnery Sergeant, do you understand that your actions this morning have created a situation that could fundamentally change how the military approaches gender integration in combat roles? Alina recognized the question as a trap designed to make her either accept responsibility for policy changes she couldn't control or deny the significance of her contributions to mission success. Either answer would be used to support predetermined conclusions about her value and the broader implications of her existence. Sir, my actions this morning were focused on preserving American lives and completing the mission. Policy implications are above my level of responsibility and expertise. General Morrison spoke up from his position at the conference table, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades translating political requirements into battlefield reality. What the gunnery sergeant is too polite to say is that she's been saving American lives for 18 months while we've been pretending she doesn't exist because it's politically convenient. The room fell silent as Morrison's words forced everyone present to confront the gap between official policies and battlefield necessities. Alina realized that she had found an advocate in someone whose reputation for straight talk could cut through the political considerations that had kept her in operational limbo. The question, Morrison continued, isn't whether Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez is capable of performing at the highest levels of special operations. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether we're going to continue pretending that capability doesn't exist because it's easier than acknowledging that our policies haven't caught up with reality. Alina felt a surge of something that might have been hope, mixed with the understanding that General Morrison's support came with its own risks. Becoming visible as a symbol of change meant accepting responsibility for outcomes that extended far beyond her individual performance. The senior general shuffled through papers that Alina suspected contained evaluations and recommendations that had already been prepared before this conference began. Gunnery Sergeant, if we were to officially recognize your contributions and integrate you into acknowledged special operations roles, are you prepared for the level of scrutiny and responsibility that would entail? Alina understood that this was the moment when she could either step back into the shadows or accept a level of visibility that would change everything about how she served her country. The choice was being presented as an opportunity, but she recognized it as both a chance for recognition and a burden that few people would willingly accept. Sir, I'm prepared to serve wherever and however the Marine Corps determines I can be most effective, regardless of the personal consequences. Her answer seemed to satisfy something in the room's collective judgment, and Alina could see subtle shifts in posture and expression that suggested decisions were being made in real time. She had just committed herself to a path that would make her either a pioneer or a cautionary tale, depending on how successfully she could navigate the challenges ahead. Outstanding, replied the senior general, his tone suggesting that Alina's response had confirmed a decision that had probably been made before the conference began. Because we're going to be announcing some significant policy changes regarding women in combat roles, and your record is going to be part of the justification for those changes. Alina realized that she had just become something more complicated than a Marine sniper. She had become a symbol, a justification, and a target for everyone who opposed the changes her existence represented. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. The video conference concluded with instructions that would fundamentally change Alina's role within the military structure. Instead of operating in the shadows as an unofficial asset, she would be transferred to a newly created position that would make her the most visible female special operations personnel in the military. As the connection terminated, Alina found herself standing in a secure communications booth with two officers whose expressions suggested they were still processing the implications of what they had just witnessed. Colonel Reeves was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of congratulations and concern. Gunnery Sergeant, I think you just became the most famous Marine sniper in the country, whether you wanted that or not. Alina nodded, understanding that fame was a weapon that could be turned against her as easily as it could be used to advance the causes she represented. Sir, permission to return to my duties while these changes are being implemented. Negative, Reeves replied, his tone suggesting that her old duties were already being reassigned to personnel who wouldn't attract the level of attention that she now carried. You're being transferred to Washington for briefings and orientation. Pack your gear, Gunnery Sergeant. Your war just moved to a different battlefield. As Alina left the TOC, She realized that 18 months of trying to prove herself in combat had led to a new challenge that would require different skills and a different kind of courage. She was about to discover whether the same qualities that made her effective as a sniper would serve her in the political and media environment that awaited her. The morning sun was higher now, casting sharp shadows between the buildings of Forward Operating Base Rhino and illuminating the mountains that had been her workplace for the past year and a half. Alina took a moment to absorb the landscape that had shaped her into the weapon she had become, understanding that she might never see it again. Her gear felt different as she packed it, transformed from tools of war into symbols of achievement that would be displayed and analyzed by people who had never held a rifle in anger. Every modification she had made to her weapon, every piece of equipment she had selected for maximum effectiveness, would become part of a story that she was only beginning to understand. The letter to her sister would remain sealed, she decided, at least until she understood what her new role would demand of her. Maria deserved explanations, but those explanations would have to wait until Alina could provide answers instead of apologies. As the helicopter lifted off from Forward Operating Base Rhino, carrying Alina toward a future that she couldn't predict or control, she looked down at the checkpoint where 8 American soldiers were alive because she had chosen to break the rules that would have kept her silent. Whatever came next, that choice would always be worth the consequences. The mountains of Afghanistan grew smaller beneath her, but the weight of what she had accomplished there would follow her wherever she went. Alina Vasquez, call sign Phantom, had proven that invisible could be more powerful than visible, but now she was about to discover whether visibility could be as effective as the shadows she was leaving behind. The war she had been fighting was over, but the battle for recognition, acceptance, and change was just beginning. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting it alone or in silence. This time, the whole world would be watching.